The security guard's hand trembled slightly as he blocked my path to the building I'd entered every morning for 12 years. Behind him, through the glass doors of Hartwell Manufacturing, I could see my younger sister Madison, standing in the lobby, her freshly manicured nails wrapped around a manila folder. She wore the kind of smile that had charmed our parents since the day she learned to walk. "Your services are no longer needed," she said, her voice carrying across the threshold with practiced authority. "After everything I'd built, after saving this company from complete collapse, after working myself to exhaustion while she played sorority princess at Stanford, my little sister had waited exactly one day after becoming CEO to throw me away like yesterday's newspaper." I handed over my keycard, smiled, and walked away. I still remember the desperation in my father's voice that September evening, 12 years ago, when he called me home from my engineering job in Seattle. Hartwell Manufacturing, our family's fastener company, was drowning in debt. The books revealed 6 months of unpaid bills, obsolete equipment, and contracts lost to overseas competitors. At 20 years old, I made the choice that would define my next decade. I quit my promising position at a tech firm and moved back to Indianapolis to save the family legacy. The factory floor smelled of rust and failed dreams. Our 12 remaining employees avoided eye contact, knowing their paychecks might bounce. My parents, once proud business owners, had aged a decade in 2 years. My mother's hands shook as she showed me the foreclosure notices. My father couldn't meet my eyes when he admitted they'd leveraged their home against business loans. While Madison was selecting her freshman courses at Stanford, I was redesigning our entire product line. The aerospace industry needed specialized fasteners that could withstand extreme temperatures and pressure variations. I spent nights studying metallurgy, days experimenting with alloys, and weekends driving to Chicago to use university lab equipment. My engineering background became our lifeline. The breakthrough came at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday. I developed a fastener design that reduced metal fatigue by 60%. The prototype caught Boeing's attention at a trade show in Wichita. They needed a supplier for a new project, someone hungry enough to meet impossible deadlines and innovative enough to solve emerging problems. But here's where I made my first strategic decision, one that would matter 12 years later. I couldn't file the patents under the company name. Hartwell Manufacturing had no assets for the legal fees, so I paid the $17,000 myself, filing under my newly formed LLC, Carla Hartwell Innovations. My parents were grateful too, relieved to question the structure. They needed solutions, not paperwork details. The Boeing contract arrived with unusual terms. They wanted assurance that the innovative mind behind the product would remain involved throughout production. Their legal team inserted a key person clause naming me specifically. If I left the project, they could terminate immediately. My parents saw it as a compliment. Madison, home for winter break, rolled her eyes and called it typical Carla making everything about herself. I structured the deal carefully. Hartwell Manufacturing would produce the fasteners, but my LLC owned the intellectual property and maintained the client relationship. The company paid licensing fees to use my designs. It seemed like semantics at the time, a formality to satisfy Boeing's lawyers. My parents signed without reading, trusting their daughter who'd given up her career to save them. 6 months into the Boeing contract, orders tripled. I hired back former employees, updated equipment, and established quality control systems that exceeded industry standards. The factory hummed with purpose again. My father walked taller. My mother stopped hiding foreclosure notices in kitchen drawers. Madison called from Stanford occasionally, usually to complain about her roommate or ask for money. She'd chosen to study business, she said, to bring professional management to our quaint family operation. I was too busy meeting production deadlines to argue, let her study theory while I lived reality. The twist came during Madison's sophomore year. I'd assumed my parents were simply proud of their youngest daughter's academic achievements. I didn't realize they were making promises about her future role in the company I was rebuilding with my own hands. Those promises would eventually cost us everything we'd worked to save. 5 years into my journey of resurrecting Hartwell Manufacturing, I discovered the betrayal purely by accident. My mother had left her email open on the office computer, and there it was, a message to Madison outlining the succession plan. Despite my success in transforming the company from bankruptcy to $8 million in annual revenue, my parents had promised their younger daughter the CEO position upon her graduation. Their reasoning was simple and cutting. A real businesswoman needs an MBA. Carla is brilliant with products, but Madison will bring legitimate corporate leadership. I stood in that empty office reading those words repeatedly, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. Not anger exactly, something colder and more calculated. If they wanted to play corporate games, I'd become a master strategist. From that moment forward, every decision I made protected my interests while growing theirs. When NASA approached us about specialized fasteners for satellite deployment systems, I negotiated personally. The contract went to my LLC, which then subcontracted manufacturing to Hartwell. When SpaceX needed suppliers for their rocket assemblies, same structure. Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, the Department of Defense, every relationship built through my reputation and maintained by my legal entity. I hired Jonathan Reeves, a contracts attorney who specialized in aerospace manufacturing. "You're building a fortress," he told me after reviewing my structures. "Everything flows through you." He was right. I wasn't stealing from my family. I was protecting the value I'd created from those who saw me as temporary management. The company grew exponentially. We expanded from 12 employees to 97. Our fasteners were in satellites orbiting Earth and rovers exploring Mars. Industry publications featured articles about our innovative designs and reliability. They always mentioned me by name, the engineer who'd revolutionized a stagnant industry. Madison spent her junior year studying abroad in Barcelona, posting Instagram photos from beaches while I negotiated million-dollar contracts. She'd changed her major from finance to strategic management, which apparently required fewer mathematics courses. Her emails home talked about networking opportunities and building social capital. She was building a tan while I built an empire. I made sure every innovation happened outside company time. My breakthrough designs were developed in my home laboratory, funded by my LLC's profits. The patents filed in my name covered next-generation fasteners that would define industry standards for decades. Hartwell Manufacturing was simply one of several entities licensed to produce my creations. The production equipment told the same story. When we needed specialized machinery from Germany, my LLC purchased it and leased it to Hartwell. The building expansion was financed through my personal guarantee, with the bank holding my patent portfolio as collateral. Every major asset that enabled our success had my name on the ownership documents. My father noticed the growth, but not the structure. He saw profits and praised my operational efficiency. My mother delighted in telling her church friends about their successful company, never mentioning which daughter made it possible. They lived in comfortable denial, believing Madison's degree would somehow qualify her to lead an organization she'd never worked for. Madison returned from Barcelona with a Spanish boyfriend and grandiose ideas about disrupting the manufacturing paradigm. She'd written her senior thesis on digital transformation in traditional industries, citing companies she'd never visited and strategies she'd never implemented. I helped edit it, correcting her fundamental misunderstandings about supply chain management. The week before Madison's graduation, our parents called a family meeting. They announced their 5-year retirement plan, with Madison joining as Vice President of Strategy immediately after graduation. She would shadow leadership before assuming the CEO role. They presented this as a done deal, never asking my opinion or acknowledging my contributions. Madison beamed at the head of the table, already planning office renovations. "I'll need the corner suite," she announced. "Image matters in corporate leadership." She'd learned all the wrong lessons at Stanford, mistaking appearance for substance, connections for competence. I smiled and congratulated her, then went home and called Jonathan. It's time to strengthen the fortress, I told him. We spent the next week adding clauses to every contract, tightening my control over intellectual property and ensuring that Hartwell Manufacturing's success remained entirely dependent on my continued cooperation. Madison thought she was inheriting a company. In reality, she was inheriting a shell that couldn't function without me. Madison's first day as vice president of strategy arrived with fanfare I'd never experienced in 12 years of actual work. My parents hired a photographer to capture their younger daughter crossing the threshold, arranged a catered breakfast for the entire staff, and presented her with business cards embossed with gold lettering. She'd never manufactured a single fastener, never met a client, never solved a production crisis at midnight, but somehow her arrival warranted celebration. "I'll need 3 assistants," Madison announced during her welcome speech, standing at a podium my father had rented specifically for the occasion. "1 for scheduling, 1 for research, and 1 for special projects. Stanford taught me that delegation is the cornerstone of executive success." The factory workers who'd been with me since the dark days exchanged glances. They knew what 120-hour work weeks looked like, and it didn't involve assistants. She commandeered the conference room for her office renovation plans, spreading fabric swatches and paint samples across the table where I'd negotiated million-dollar contracts. "Dusty Blue promotes innovative thinking," she explained to our head of production, who needed that room for quality control meetings. "And these Barcelona tiles will establish the right energy flow." Her salary demands came next. Despite contributing nothing to revenue, she insisted on matching my compensation. "Equal pay for equal positions," she said, apparently believing her title carried the same weight as 12 years of building the company. My parents acquiesced immediately, praising her for knowing her worth. While I managed relationships with Boeing's engineering teams, Madison hosted wine tastings for her sorority sisters in her half-renovated office. She called them networking events and expensed $1,000 catering bills to the company. "You have to spend money to make money," she'd say, though none of these connections ever materialized into actual business. Marcus Chen arrived in week 3, introduced as Madison's strategic consultant. He was the Spanish boyfriend from Barcelona, though he'd traded his European accent for an MBA from an online program. My sister hired him at twice the salary of our senior engineers, tasking him with organizational optimization. He spent most of his time photographing Madison for her new corporate Instagram account. The real damage started when Madison discovered our quality control protocols. "These redundancies are stifling innovation," she declared, watching our technicians perform the 3rd round of stress testing on aerospace components. Stanford case studies show that excessive quality control reduces profit margins by 15%. She'd never seen what happens when a faulty fastener fails at 30,000 feet. I found her efficiency reports on my desk each Monday, filled with suggestions to cut testing time, reduce material quality, and eliminate redundant safety positions. Each recommendation would have destroyed our certifications, ended our contracts, and potentially caused catastrophic failures. But Madison only saw numbers on spreadsheets, not lives, depending on our products. The documentation began subtly. Marcus started appearing at production meetings with a tablet recording process inefficiencies. They photographed me during the rare moments I showed frustration when equipment failed, when suppliers delayed shipments, when impossible deadlines loomed. Madison compiled these moments into presentations about my reactive management style. "Carla operates from a scarcity mindset," she told our parents during a Sunday dinner I wasn't invited to attend. I heard about it from our purchasing manager, who'd overheard Madison on a conference call. "She's too focused on technical details to see strategic opportunities. That's why she needs MBA-level oversight." Her friends from Stanford started arriving for consulting opportunities. Madison hired her roommate as director of digital strategy, despite the girl's only experience being a failed fashion blog. Her study group partner became our head of innovation, tasked with reimagining our corporate narrative. Each hire came with an inflated salary and a corner office carved from productive space. I watched our overhead costs balloon while these consultants produced PowerPoint presentations about synergistic thinking and paradigm shifts. They scheduled meetings about meetings, created committees to oversight other committees, and generated reports that no one read. Meanwhile, I worked 18-hour days to meet production deadlines their strategies had complicated. The breaking point came when Madison presented her leadership assessment matrix to the board. She'd rated every senior manager on qualities like executive presence and strategic vision. My scores were deliberately low in every category that couldn't be quantified. Carla excels at tactical execution. Her report concluded, but lacks the polish and perspective required for senior leadership in a modern corporation. She'd learned to weaponize corporate speak against someone who spoke with their hands dirty from actual work. Every success I'd achieved was reframed as a limitation, every practical decision evidence of my inability to think strategically. The PowerPoint was professionally designed, the graphics compelling, the message clear. I was a necessary but temporary solution to be replaced by someone with the right credentials. But Madison had made a crucial error in her assessment. She'd focused so intently on diminishing my image that she'd never bothered to understand the legal structures underpinning our success. While she was building her case for my removal, I was quietly ensuring that removing me would be the last decision she'd ever make for Hartwell Manufacturing. The announcement came during the company's 15th anniversary celebration, a date that meant nothing since Hartwell Manufacturing had existed for 40 years before I saved it from bankruptcy. My parents chose this manufactured milestone to reveal their retirement and Madison's appointment as CEO. They stood at the podium in the decorated warehouse, my father's arm around Madison's shoulders, my mother wiping away proud tears, while employees who'd weathered the dark years with me shifted uncomfortably. Madison brings fresh perspectives and modern leadership principles, my father declared to the assembled staff. Her strategic vision will take Hartwell Manufacturing into a bold new future. He spoke as if the past 12 years had been mere preparation for this moment, as if everything I'd built was just a foundation for Madison's grand designs. She took the microphone with practiced confidence, wearing a suit that cost more than most employees' monthly salaries. Change is coming to Hartwell. She announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never earned it. We're going to transform from a traditional manufacturer to an innovation powerhouse. Some of you will rise to meet this challenge. Others, she paused, scanning the crowd with calculating eyes, others will find opportunities elsewhere. The consultants she'd hired applauded enthusiastically. The actual workers, the ones who knew every machine's quirk, every client's preference, every process that kept us profitable, stood silent. They looked at me, searching for reassurance I couldn't provide. I'd protected the company from external threats, but I couldn't protect them from internal destruction. Marcus had prepared a 37-slide presentation about the new Hartwell Manufacturing. Each slide featured stock photos of diverse young professionals in modern offices, bearing no resemblance to our actual workforce or facilities. He outlined plans to right-size the organization, optimize human capital, and align resources with strategic objectives, corporate euphemisms for firing anyone Madison deemed insufficiently modern. The first terminations came within a week. My hand-trained quality control team was replaced by Marcus's connections from his online MBA program. The lead engineer who'd helped me develop our NASA-certified processes was dismissed for resistance to change after questioning Madison's plan to reduce testing protocols. The purchasing manager, who'd negotiated favorable terms with suppliers for a decade, was let go to make room for Madison's sorority sister's boyfriend. I watched Madison transform our functional organization into a playground for her Stanford network. The engineering floor became an open concept innovation lab where her friends held brainstorming sessions about disrupting the fastener paradigm. They covered whiteboards with buzzwords while actual production slowed, quality declined, and deadlines slipped. "You're too emotionally invested," Madison told me when I raised concerns about meeting Boeing's specifications. "Leadership requires objectivity. That's what my professors emphasized. Emotional distance enables strategic decision-making." She learned to mistake callousness for leadership, cruelty for strength. The consultant reports multiplied, each recommending further cuts to experienced staff. Madison created new positions with inflated titles for her friends: Chief Happiness Officer, Director of Workplace Synergy, Vice President of Cultural Transformation. Each appointment further bloated our overhead while diminishing our capability. My parents attended these transformations with enthusiasm. They toured the renovated offices, admired the modern furniture, and praised Madison's corporate vision. When longtime employees approached them with concerns, they redirected them to Madison. "She's the future" became their standard response. They decided their succession plan superseded any obligation to the people who'd saved their company. I discovered the full scope of Marcus's influence during a late-night review of board meeting minutes. He wasn't just Madison's boyfriend and consultant, he was actively positioning himself as her indispensable advisor. His recommendations always enhanced his own authority while diminishing mine. He'd created an entire shadow structure where every decision required his input. The most insidious part was their documentation strategy. Every interaction was recorded, every challenge to their plans characterized as obstructionism. They built a narrative where I was the primary obstacle to progress, a relic of old-fashioned thinking holding back transformation. Madison's emails to the board consistently praised my historical contributions while emphasizing the need for future-focused leadership. But while Madison and Marcus orchestrated their corporate theater, they'd overlooked fundamental realities. They saw Hartwell Manufacturing as a company to be transformed, not understanding it was actually a complex web of relationships, contracts, and legal structures, all centering on one person, me. They were planning to rule an empire that existed only through my continued cooperation. The Thursday before the succession, I met with Jonathan one last time. We reviewed every contract, every patent, every carefully constructed dependency. "They have no idea what they're inheriting," he mused, examining the termination clauses that would activate upon my departure. "It's like they're taking ownership of a car without realizing you hold the engine." Madison scheduled my termination for Monday morning, wanting to start her first week as CEO with a decisive action. She'd already hired my replacement, another Stanford graduate with impressive credentials and no understanding of aerospace manufacturing. He'd spent the previous week measuring my office for his furniture. I spent my last weekend as an employee backing up my personal files, saying quiet goodbyes to the workers Madison had marked for termination, and ensuring everyone understood their options when the inevitable collapse began. Most already had my personal contact information. They knew which ship was sinking and which lifeboat to board. Sunday evening, I received a text from Madison. "Be at the office early tomorrow. We need to handle your transition professionally." She'd mistaken cruelty for professionalism, power for leadership. Monday morning would teach her the difference between holding a title and wielding actual authority. The security guard's name was Harold. I'd hired him 8 years ago when his construction job dried up, and I'd trained him myself on our security protocols. That Monday morning, his eyes couldn't meet mine as he stood between me and the building I'd entered freely for over a decade. Behind him, through the gleaming glass doors I'd had installed during our first profitable year, Madison stood like a general surveying conquered territory. She'd orchestrated this moment for maximum impact. The entire first shift had been instructed to arrive 30 minutes early for a mandatory leadership announcement. They lined the lobby walls, maintenance workers still carrying their toolboxes, production staff in their safety gear, office personnel clutching coffee cups. Madison wanted an audience for her first act as CEO. Carla. She called out, her voice carrying across the parking lot with practiced authority. She wore a cream-colored suit that had never seen a factory floor, her hair professionally styled for the photographer she'd hired to document this historic transition. Marcus stood beside her with a tablet recording everything for their corporate transformation portfolio. I walked through the gathered employees, seeing the confusion and concern in faces I'd known for years. Sarah from accounting grabbed my hand as I passed, squeezing it briefly. Tom from maintenance looked like he wanted to speak but couldn't find words. They sensed something fundamental shifting, though they couldn't yet comprehend the magnitude. Madison held a manila folder like a trophy, her manicured nails done weekly at a salon that charged more than some employees made in a day, gripping it with theatrical precision. As incoming CEO, my first responsibility is ensuring Hartwell Manufacturing has the right leadership for our innovative future, she announced, projecting her voice for the camera. Effective immediately, your services are no longer needed. She extended the folder toward me, expecting me to reach for it like a condemned prisoner accepting their sentence. The termination letter was visible through the opening, drafted on the new letterhead she'd designed with her personal branding consultant. I noticed she'd listed herself as CEO, even though our parents' official retirement wasn't until Friday. Such attention to image, such ignorance of details that mattered. I'll need your keycard, your parking pass, and your company devices. Madison continued, following the script she'd probably rehearsed with Marcus. Security will escort you to clear your office. You have 30 minutes to remove personal items under supervision. She'd learned these procedures from a Stanford case study on managing difficult terminations, never realizing she was about to provide a real-world lesson in unintended consequences. I reached into my pocket, pulling out the key card I'd carried since our first day of profitability. The parking pass that designated the spot I'd earned by arriving before dawn for 12 years. The company phone that had rung at all hours with production emergencies, client concerns, and supplier negotiations. I held them for a moment, feeling their weight not physical, but symbolic. Of course, I said, my voice calm and steady. I'd practiced this moment in my mind, knowing it would come, preparing my response. I handed the items to Harold, not Madison, maintaining eye contact with the man whose family I'd helped support through rough times. His hands trembled as he accepted them. Madison's smile widened, mistaking my compliance for submission. We're grateful for your historical contributions. She recited the phrase she'd workshopped with Marcus to sound appreciative, while emphasizing I was already past tense. Your operational knowledge helped bridge the company through its traditional phase. Now, we need leadership equipped for digital transformation and strategic innovation. The employees watched in stunned silence. These weren't corporate executives accustomed to strategic restructuring. They were people who'd weathered near bankruptcies with me, who'd worked unpaid overtime to meet impossible deadlines, who'd trusted my promises that their loyalty would be rewarded. Now they watched their advocate being discarded like obsolete equipment. I wish you success in your future endeavors, Madison concluded, delivering the corporate kiss-off with practiced insincerity. She turned to Marcus, who began photographing her decisive leadership moment for their transformation portfolio. Neither noticed the text messages already flying between employees, the subtle head shakes of disbelief, the maintenance supervisor stepping outside to make a phone call. I smiled, not the bitter smile of defeat or the angry smile of resentment, but the genuine smile of someone who understands the situation far better than their opponent. Thank you, Madison, I said loud enough for everyone to hear. I'm sure you'll give Hartwell Manufacturing exactly what it deserves. She heard gratitude where I'd offered prophecy. Marcus heard submission where I'd promised consequences. The employees heard farewell where I'd actually said, wait for it. Only Harold, still holding my surrendered items, seemed to grasp that something larger was in motion. He'd been here during the dark days. He knew I didn't surrender. I strategized. "Oh, one thing," Madison added, savoring her authority. "The non-compete agreement you signed prevents you from working in aerospace manufacturing for 2 years. Our lawyers will enforce it aggressively." She'd had Marcus research standard CEO terminations, never bothering to check whether I'd actually signed such an agreement. I hadn't. My original employment predated their legal sophistication, and I'd carefully avoided signing any updates. Security flanked me for the walk to my office, though Harold assigned himself rather than the outside contractors Madison preferred. We passed the engineering department where my innovations had been born, the production floor where my designs became reality, the quality control stations where my standards ensured perfection. Each step felt like reviewing troops before a strategic retreat. My office, which would be stripped and renovated within hours for Madison's hand-picked replacement, contained little worth taking. The personal items that mattered had been removed quietly over the past month. The patents hanging on the wall were copies. The originals resided in my lawyer's safe. The photos of product launches and team celebrations had already been digitized and stored. I filled a single box with meaningless mementos, maintaining the illusion of unexpected termination. Madison waited in the parking lot for my final exit, wanting to witness her triumph completely. The employees had been dismissed back to their stations, though many lingered near windows. Marcus filmed my walk to the car, creating content for their leadership transformation case study. They thought they were documenting a new beginning. They were actually recording the first moments of their end. As I loaded the box into my car, the same practical sedan I'd driven since before the company's recovery, my phone buzzed with incoming messages. Not the company phone I'd just surrendered, but my personal device. Boeing's procurement director, NASA's project manager, SpaceX's quality assurance team. Word of my termination had traveled at the speed of modern communication, and my real employers wanted to discuss their contracts. Madison called out one final insult disguised as courtesy. "We'll mail your final paycheck. No need to return for any reason." She wanted me permanently gone, erased from the company's future. Behind her, through the lobby windows, I saw several employees on their phones. The maintenance supervisor, who'd stepped out earlier, was gesturing animatedly. The first ripples of understanding were spreading. I drove away from Hartwell Manufacturing at exactly 8:47 on Monday morning, 12 years after arriving to save it from destruction. In my rearview mirror, Madison stood triumphant in the parking lot arms, crossed, watching her obstacle disappear. She'd won the battle she'd planned, executed the corporate coup she'd orchestrated, claimed the throne she'd always believed was hers by birthright. She just didn't realize the throne controlled nothing without the kingdom's cooperation, and I'd spent 12 years ensuring that cooperation flowed through me alone. Madison had fired an employee. She was about to discover she'd actually dismissed the entire foundation of her inherited empire. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of chaos Madison's MBA courses had never covered. I sat in my home office coffee, steaming beside me, watching emails pour into my personal account while Madison discovered the difference between inheriting a title and commanding an organization. The first call came at 7:23. Boeing's senior procurement director, David Richardson, a man who didn't panic easily, but whose voice now carried unmistakable tension. "Whoa, Carla, what's happening over there?" His words came rapid-fire, unusual for someone who typically measured every syllable. "I've got a production meeting in 30 minutes about the 787 fastener modifications, and your sister just told my team she doesn't have access to the technical specifications. She said you locked her out of the systems." I leaned back in my chair, having anticipated this call almost to the minute. "David, all specifications for proprietary designs are stored on secure servers owned by Carla Hartwell Innovations, not Hartwell Manufacturing. Madison terminated my consulting agreement yesterday when she terminated my employment. Without an active contract, I can't legally provide access to my intellectual property. The silence stretched for several seconds. David had worked with me for 8 years through countless deadline crunches and engineering challenges. He understood contracts, but more importantly, he understood consequences. The designs we're manufacturing, the modifications we requested last month, the entire production line we've configured, are all based on patents and specifications owned by my LLC, I confirmed. Hartwell Manufacturing has a license to produce them, but that license requires my active involvement. Clause 17, subsection 3. You reviewed it yourself when we signed the master agreement. I heard papers rustling, David pulling out contracts his legal team had assured him were standard. They were anything but standard. Jonathan and I had spent years crafting agreements that looked routine but contained carefully placed dependencies. Every major client had signed them, trusting my reputation and track record. Can your sister access the current production specifications? We have 40,000 units in process. She'll have access to whatever was saved on Hartwell's internal systems, I replied. Basic measurements, material lists, standard procedures, but the proprietary thermal treatment protocols, the stress distribution algorithms, the quality assurance parameters that make our fasteners aerospace certified, those were never stored on company servers. David's vocabulary shifted from procurement director to former Navy pilot. After exhausting his extensive collection of profanity, he returned to business mode. How do we fix this? Madison is CEO now. I'm sure she has innovative solutions. I kept my tone professional, though we both heard the subtext. She mentioned bringing fresh perspectives to traditional manufacturing challenges. The Boeing contract represented 40% of Hartwell's revenue. David knew it. I knew it. Madison apparently had never bothered to learn it. She'd been too busy planning office renovations to understand the business she'd inherited. My phone rang again, before David could respond. NASA this time. Then Lockheed Martin. SpaceX. Each conversation followed the same pattern: confusion, revelation, controlled panic. Madison had spent Monday afternoon calling clients to introduce herself as the new CEO, promising enhanced innovation and streamlined processes. Tuesday morning, those clients discovered she couldn't access the innovations or understand the processes. By 9 o'clock, Madison had attempted to convene her senior staff to address what she termed technical difficulties. I heard about it from Sarah in accounting, who called me from her personal phone. She's screaming at the IT department, Sarah whispered, demanding they hack into your servers. The head of IT just explained that's illegal, and she fired him on the spot. The IT director, Benjamin Torres, had been with us for 6 years. He understood our systems because he'd helped me design them. More importantly, he understood the legal boundaries between company property and personal intellectual property. His termination meant Madison had just lost the only person who might have helped her navigate the technical maze I'd constructed. Text messages from production floor supervisors painted a picture of escalating dysfunction. Madison had stormed onto the floor, demanding manual overrides of the computer-controlled machinery. When informed that manual overrides would void aerospace certifications, she'd accused the supervisors of sabotage. Marcus followed her with his tablet, documenting what he called resistance to change, but what any competent observer would recognize as desperation. The machinery situation proved particularly educational for Madison's Stanford-trained perspective. Our custom equipment from Germany didn't just require passwords, it required rotating authentication codes that changed every 30 days. I'd established this system after a competitor attempted industrial espionage. The codes were generated by an algorithm I'd developed, stored on my personal servers, and distributed through my LLC's secure network. Tuesday's production run ground to a halt at 11:15 when the October codes expired. Madison watched millions of dollars in precision machinery become elaborate paperweights. The German manufacturer's support line explained they could reset the systems, but only with authorization from the registered owner, Carla Hartwell Innovations LLC. This is corporate sabotage. Madison's voice carried across the production floor, her carefully styled appearance beginning to fray. Mascara smudged from rage, tears suit jacket, discarded hair escaping from its professional arrangement. She's deliberately destroying our company. The production manager, Roberto Vega, attempted to explain the situation. Roberto had started as a line worker when I first arrived, earning his engineering degree at night, while I promoted him through the ranks. His loyalty to the company ran deep, but his understanding of reality ran deeper. Ms. Hartwell, he said, using formality to maintain professional distance, these systems were designed this way for security. Your sister didn't lock us out. We locked ourselves out when we terminated our relationship with the patent holder. Madison's response was to fire Roberto. In 2 days, she'd terminated the heads of IT and production, the two people most capable of helping her navigate the crisis. Her Stanford network had taught her that decisive leadership meant quick terminations. They'd never mentioned that firing competent people during emergencies only accelerated collapse. By Tuesday evening, the first news had reached industry publications. Hartwell Manufacturing Faces Production Crisis ran in Aerospace Weekly's online edition. The article quoted unnamed sources expressing concern about delivery schedules. Boeing's stock price dipped 0.5 percentage point on supplier uncertainty. Madison's grand vision was becoming public embarrassment in real time. She called an emergency board meeting for Wednesday morning, demanding solutions from her hand-picked advisors. Marcus prepared a presentation blaming legacy system vulnerabilities and operational sabotage. They still didn't understand the fundamental problem. There was no sabotage because there was nothing to sabotage. Madison had inherited a company that existed through licensing agreements she'd terminated, operated through systems she couldn't access, and depended on relationships she'd severed. The irony was exquisite. Madison had spent months documenting my operational focus as a weakness, never realizing that operations were everything. While she'd studied theoretical frameworks and strategic paradigms, I'd built practical dependencies that made me indispensable. Her MBA had taught her to seize power. My experience had taught me to create value that couldn't be seized. Tuesday night ended with Madison sending a company-wide email promising temporary technical adjustments and threatening termination for anyone spreading negative rumors. Half the recipients forwarded it to me, adding their own commentary about rats and sinking ships. The empire Madison had inherited was discovering it had no foundation, and the Empress was learning that crowns don't create kingdoms, competence does. Wednesday morning brought the kind of catastrophic cascade that business schools use as cautionary tales. Madison arrived at Hartwell Manufacturing at 6 a.m., apparently believing that early arrival would somehow demonstrate leadership through the crisis. She found the parking lot already buzzing with activity, not from eager employees, but from representatives of our 3 largest clients who'd driven through the night for unscheduled visits. David Richardson from Boeing stood beside a black town car cell phone pressed to his ear, his face carrying the expression of a man calculating disaster mitigation strategies. Beside him, NASA's procurement team huddled around tablets, reviewing contracts by dawn light. A SpaceX van had claimed 3 parking spaces, its occupants engaged in what appeared to be heated conference calls with their legal departments. Madison attempted to project confidence as she approached them, Marcus trailing with his ever-present tablet. "Gentlemen, I appreciate your concern, but I assure you, Hartwell Manufacturing remains fully committed to meeting all contractual obligations. Perhaps we could schedule a formal meeting." "We're past scheduling," David interrupted, ending his call with deliberate finality. "My legal team has been reviewing our master agreement all night. specifically the key person clause in Section 12. He pulled out a printed contract pages marked with fluorescent tabs. It clearly states that our agreement depends on Carla Hartwell's direct involvement in design production oversight and quality assurance. Madison's practiced smile wavered slightly. I understand there may be transitional concerns, but I've assembled a world-class team of innovators who... Can they access the thermal treatment protocols for the 787 modifications? David's question cut through her corporate speak like a precision blade. Because we have 40,000 units in production that need those specifications by Friday, or Boeing faces penalties that make your company's value look like a rounding error. NASA's lead representative, Dr. Patricia Wells, stepped forward. I'd worked with Patricia for 6 years on satellite deployment systems that required absolute precision. She was brilliant, methodical, and had zero patience for corporate maneuvering. Ms. Hartwell, our Artemis program components are manufactured to specifications that exist only in your sister's secured databases. Without access to those specifications, we can't verify quality standards. Those are company specifications. Madison insisted, her voice climbing slightly. Carla was an employee when she developed them. They belonged to Hartwell Manufacturing. Marcus attempted to support her position. From a legal standpoint, work product created during employment typically transfers to... Stop. Patricia's single word carried the authority of someone who'd managed billion-dollar space programs. I've spent the night with NASA's legal team reviewing every patent, every specification, every design document. Your sister was remarkably thorough. She developed these innovations through her personal LLC, licensing them to Hartwell for production. You terminated both her employment and, by extension, those licensing agreements. The SpaceX team leader, James Chen, no relation to Marcus despite the shared surname, added his assessment. We've already initiated contingency protocols. If Hartwell can't fulfill existing orders by the end of the week, we're authorized to resource immediately. He paused, letting the weight of resource sink in. Carla Hartwell has already been contacted about establishing alternative production arrangements. Madison's carefully constructed composure began cracking. You can't simply abandon established contracts because of temporary technical delays. We have enforceable agreements, which include key person clauses. David interrupted again. Clauses your sister insisted upon, which we initially resisted, but ultimately accepted because of her track record. Those clauses give us unilateral termination rights if Carla Hartwell is no longer directly involved in our projects. The parking lot had become a stage for corporate theater, with employees arriving for their shifts, slowing to witness the confrontation. Madison noticed the audience and attempted to relocate the discussion inside, but the clients refused. They wanted their positions clearly understood by everyone who might be affected by the coming changes. Bummer. Furthermore, Patricia continued adjusting her glasses in a gesture I'd seen precede many devastating technical assessments. Our quality audits require documentation that only Carla maintained, certification processes she designed, testing protocols she implemented. Without her verification, every component produced becomes suspect. James pulled out his phone, showing Madison an email thread. This is from our chief engineer. He's recommending immediate suspension of all Hartwell components pending quality re-verification. Do you understand what that means? Every rocket using your fasteners gets grounded until we can guarantee safety standards. The financial implications hung in the morning air like smog. Madison had inherited a company worth approximately $50 million, based on active contracts and projected revenue. Those contracts were evaporating in real time, each client's position, reducing Hartwell's value by millions. There must be a solution, Madison said, desperation creeping into her voice. If we could arrange a consulting agreement with Carla, perhaps a temporary advisory role. I asked her that yesterday, David admitted. She very politely explained that her non-compete agreement, which doesn't exist by the way I checked, prevents her from any involvement with Hartwell Manufacturing. The sarcasm in his voice could have etched steel. Apparently, you were quite emphatic about her permanent separation from the company. Marcus attempted another intervention. From a strategic perspective, we could leverage alternative suppliers to fill any temporary gaps. Patricia actually laughed a sharp sound devoid of humor. Alternative suppliers. Do you have any idea how long it takes to certify aerospace components? The testing alone requires months. The documentation takes years to establish. We chose Hartwell specifically for Carla's innovations and reliability. Without her, you're just another machine shop with delusions of competence. The coup de grace came from James, who'd been typing on his phone throughout the conversation. I've just received board approval for immediate contract suspension. Our legal team will send formal notice within the hour. We're invoking Section 18 of our agreement, immediate termination for failure to maintain key personnel. Madison stood in her own parking lot, watching millions of dollars in contracts dissolve before breakfast. The clients who'd driven through the night hadn't come to negotiate, they'd come to formally sever relationships before the situation deteriorated further. Each understood that aerospace manufacturing tolerated no ambiguity, no quality compromises, no leadership vacuums. This is coordinated attack, Madison declared, grasping for conspiracy where only consequences existed. You've obviously colluded with my sister to destroy Ms. Hartwell. David's voice carried 40 years of aerospace experience and zero patience for delusion. Your sister built relationships through competence, maintained them through reliability, and structured them through remarkable foresight. You destroyed those relationships through arrogance. The only coordination here is among clients, protecting ourselves from your incompetence. The meeting dissolved with handshakes between the clients. They'd formed bonds through years of working with me and careful avoidance of Madison's attempted farewell pleasantries. As their vehicles departed, Madison stood in the emptying parking lot, her strategic vision colliding with tactical reality. Marcus filmed the entire exchange, still believing documentation would somehow support their narrative. He'd recorded Hartwell Manufacturing's largest clients, explaining exactly why the company had become worthless overnight. Evidence of Madison's leadership, creating the crisis she'd blamed on sabotage. Inside the building, word spread faster than Madison could attempt damage control. Employees who'd arrived to news of the parking lot confrontation understood the implications immediately. Without Boeing, NASA, and SpaceX, Hartwell Manufacturing had no reason to exist. The smaller clients would follow the giant's lead, abandoning a supplier who'd lost both capability and credibility. By noon, the client exodus was complete. Every major contract suspended or terminated, every revenue stream severed. Madison had inherited a manufacturing empire on Monday and reduced it to an empty building with expensive equipment by Wednesday. Her innovative leadership had innovated the company directly into irrelevance. The afternoon brought frantic board calls as investors discovered their valuable asset had become a liability. Madison attempted to blame client overreaction, technical glitches, and my sabotage. But the board members who'd reviewed the contracts throughout the night understood the truth. Madison had fired the person every agreement depended upon, then wondered why the agreements collapsed. Her Stanford education had never covered this scenario because it was too obviously stupid for case study. Who fires the person their entire business depends on? Who inherits an empire and immediately exiles the only person who understands how it functions? Madison had answered both questions with decisive ignorance, transforming herself from heir to a fortune into guardian of worthless machinery and empty buildings. Thursday arrived with the kind of mechanical rebellion that would have been comedic if it weren't so devastating. Madison discovered that modern manufacturing equipment could be remarkably uncooperative when denied proper authentication. The German precision machinery that formed the backbone of our production capability had ground to a complete halt, their screens displaying error messages in multiple languages, all essentially saying the same thing: access denied. I received the panicked call from Roberto's replacement at 7:15 a.m. Madison had promoted one of Marcus's MBA friends to head of production, a man whose previous experience involved optimizing fast food drive-through times. His voice cracked as he explained their situation. "The machines are completely locked out," he stammered. "We've tried everything, factory resets, calling the manufacturers, even attempting to bypass the software. Nothing works. The German technicians say only the registered owner can authorize a system restore." I sipped my morning coffee, having expected this call since Madison terminated me. "The equipment operates on a security protocol I designed after our competitor tried to steal our specifications 3 years ago. The machines require authenticated codes that rotate monthly. Without those codes, they're essentially very expensive furniture." "But surely there's an emergency override, a master password?" "Of course there is," I confirmed. "It's a 64-character algorithmic sequence that changes every 72 hours, generated by software I developed and licensed to my LLC. Would you like to guess it?" The silence stretched while he processed the implications. Madison had inherited a production floor filled with $16 million worth of equipment that wouldn't function without my cooperation. The irony was delicious. She'd spent months criticizing my operational obsession while never understanding that operations were the business. By 8:30, Madison had assembled an emergency technical team, pulling IT specialists from 3 staffing agencies and promising premium rates for anyone who could crack my security systems. They arrived with impressive credentials and absolute confidence, assuring her that no system was truly impenetrable. Their confidence lasted exactly 43 minutes. The first specialist, a young man who'd introduced himself as a penetration testing expert, emerged from the server room visibly shaken. "This isn't just encryption," he told Madison, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "This is layered algorithmic time-based security with physical hardware keys. It would take the NSA years to crack this, and by then the codes would have changed 1,000,000 times." Madison's response was predictable. She accused him of incompetence, fired him on the spot, and brought in the next expert. By noon, she'd burned through 6 specialists, each reaching the same conclusion: the security wasn't designed to keep people out temporarily, it was designed to make unauthorized access mathematically impossible. The patent situation proved even more educational for Madison's MBA-trained perspective. She convened a meeting with Hartwell's corporate attorney, demanding he find a legal way to force me to release company property. Attorney William Fredericks, who'd worked with our family for 20 years, had spent the previous night reviewing every document in our corporate archives. "Madison, I need you to understand something." William began spreading papers across the conference table. "Your sister didn't steal anything. Every patent, every design, every innovation was developed through her personal LLC and licensed to Hartwell Manufacturing. These aren't employment agreements, they're vendor contracts." "That's impossible," Madison insisted. "She was our employee. Everything she created belongs to the company." William pulled out a document dated 12 years ago. "Here's Carla's original employment agreement. Notice what's missing. Any mention of intellectual property assignments. She was hired as an operations manager, not an engineer. Every engineering innovation came from her LLC, contracted separately." Marcus attempted his usual interjection. "Surely there's precedent for challenging these arrangements. No court would uphold such an obvious manipulation of corporate manipulation." William's professional composure cracked slightly. "Your sister saved this company using her own resources, her own innovations, and her own credit. She structured everything transparently. The board approved every licensing agreement. You signed many of them yourself as Vice President Madison." The revelation that Madison had personally approved the very structures now destroying her authority added another layer of irony. She'd been so focused on her title and office renovations that she'd never read the documents she'd signed. Each signature had been another brick in the fortress I'd built to protect my innovations. Show me the patents, Madison demanded. William produced a folder 3 inches thick, just the summary pages. The full patent portfolio filled 2 filing cabinets. Madison flipped through pages of technical drawings, specification sheets, and legal descriptions, her face growing paler with each document. Aerospace fastener with thermal expansion compensation. Inventor Carla Hartwell. Assignee Carla Hartwell. Innovations, LLC. Stress distribution algorithm for critical junction components. Inventor Carla Hartwell. Assignee Carla Hartwell. Innovations, LLC. Manufacturing process for carbon fiber integration. Inventor Carla Hartwell. Assignee Carla Hartwell. Innovations, LLC. Page after page, innovation after innovation, all legally owned by my personal entity. The patents weren't just for fasteners, they covered manufacturing processes, quality control systems, testing methodologies, even the software that managed our supply chain. I'd built an entire technological ecosystem under my own name while Madison was studying theoretical business cases. How many patents total? Madison's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. 47 issued patents with another 18 pending, William replied. The portfolio has an estimated value of $30 million, possibly more. Every product Hartwell Manufacturing produces uses at least 3 of these patents. Most use 7 or 8. The mathematics were simple enough even for Madison's strategic mind. Without access to my patents, Hartwell couldn't manufacture anything beyond basic hardware store fasteners. The aerospace certifications, the specialty alloys, the precision specifications, all depended on intellectual property I owned personally. We'll develop new products, Madison declared with desperate determination. Innovate around her patents. How hard can it be to design fasteners? The production team exchanged glances that suggested Madison had just asked how hard it could be to redesign physics. One of the senior engineers, who'd somehow survived the week's terminations, cleared his throat. Ms. Hartwell, developing one aerospace-certified fastener typically takes 18 months and $2 million in testing. Your sister's innovations revolutionized the industry because she solved problems companies had struggled with for decades. We can't simply design. Around her patents, they cover fundamental solutions to engineering challenges. Thursday afternoon brought more revelations as Madison discovered the true extent of her inherited emptiness. The equipment leases all named my LLC as the lessor. The specialized tools were registered to my company. Even the custom software that managed inventory belonged to me. Madison had fired the owner of everything that made Hartwell Manufacturing functional. Desperation drove increasingly wild solutions. Madison proposed hiring industrial spies to steal the specifications Marcus had to explain that corporate espionage was illegal. She suggested reverse engineering our own products. The engineers explained that without the manufacturing parameters, they'd just create inferior copies. She even proposed suing me for unfair competition. William pointed out I wasn't competing, just declining to continue licensing my property to someone who'd terminated our relationship. By Thursday evening, the production floor sat silent. Millions of dollars in equipment waited uselessly for codes that would never come. Boxes of partially completed orders gathered dust impossible to finish without specifications. The most advanced aerospace manufacturing facility in the Midwest had become an extremely expensive warehouse. Madison's final meeting of the day involved Marcus presenting a strategic pivot toward becoming a consulting-focused innovation lab. Even the board members attending by phone couldn't hide their incredulous laughter. Hartwell. Manufacturing without manufacturing was just an empty building with a prestigious name and catastrophic debt. The patent problem had revealed the fundamental truth: Madison's education had never taught legal ownership meant nothing without the ability to create value. She owned a company. I owned everything that made the company valuable. Her MBA had focused on managing existing assets. My engineering background had taught me to create assets that couldn't be managed without me. Friday morning arrived with the kind of financial reckoning that turns executives' hair gray overnight. Madison discovered that inheriting a company meant inheriting its obligations, and those obligations had my name written all over them in ways her strategic vision had never anticipated. The call from First National Bank came at exactly 9 a.m. Bankers appreciated punctuality when calling in loans. Thomas Brennan, Senior Vice President of Commercial Lending, had worked with me for 8 years. He'd structured the financing that enabled our expansion, trusted my projections, and built his own reputation on Hartwell's success. His voice carried none of its usual warmth when Madison finally took his call after keeping him on hold for 15 minutes. "Ms. Hartwell, we need to discuss your company's credit facilities immediately." He began skipping pleasantries entirely. "I've been reviewing our agreements in light of recent developments, and we have significant concerns about your ability to maintain the terms of our lending covenants." Madison activated her CEO voice, the one she'd practiced in Stanford presentation courses. "Thomas, I appreciate your diligence, but I assure you, Hartwell Manufacturing remains financially sound. Our fundamentals are strong, and we're simply experiencing a temporary transition as we implement new strategic initiatives." "Your fundamentals?" Thomas's laugh held no humor. "Your revenues dropped to zero as of Wednesday when your 3 largest clients terminated their contracts. Your production has halted completely. Your key personnel are resigning en masse. Which fundamentals exactly remain strong?" Marcus leaned into the speakerphone, attempting his usual intervention. "From a strategic perspective, we're pivoting toward a consulting model that will—" "Stop." Thomas's interruption carried decades of banking authority. "I don't care about your pivots or perspectives. I care about the $22 million in outstanding loans secured by assets and guaranteed by agreements you've just violated." The blood drained from Madison's face as she finally opened the loan documents she'd inherited but never read. Page after page detailed security agreements, personal guarantees, and collateral assignments. Her eyes widened as she reached the signature pages, not their parents' signatures as she'd assumed, but mine guaranteeing millions with personal assets. "The primary collateral for your credit line," Thomas continued, his voice now carrying the careful precision of someone documenting a conversation for legal purposes, "consists of patent portfolios owned by Carla Hartwell Innovations, LLC. The secondary guarantee involves real property, specifically your parents' home, which was transferred to Carla's ownership 4 years ago as additional security." Madison's world tilted. "Our parents' house. That's impossible. They would never—" "They would, and they did," Thomas confirmed. "When the company needed expansion capital but lacked sufficient assets, Carla provided personal guarantees backed by her patent portfolio and real property. Your parents transferred their home to her for estate planning purposes, allowing her to use it as collateral while protecting it from potential business creditors." I remembered that difficult conversation with our parents, explaining how their beloved family home could be saved only by transferring ownership. They trusted me to protect them, never imagining their younger daughter would someday trigger the very scenario we'd guarded against. "The lending agreements include specific covenants," Thomas continued relentlessly: "maintenance of key contracts, preservation of intellectual property access, and retention of essential personnel. You violated all 3. The loans are now in technical default." "Technical default." Madison's voice cracked. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means we can demand immediate repayment of all outstanding balances. $22 million. Due within 30 days unless the violations are cured." He paused, letting the numbers sink in. Curing the violations would require reinstating your contracts, regaining patent access, and retaining key personnel. Since you fired the person who represents all three requirements, I don't see how that's possible." The conference room fell silent except for the speakerphone's electronic hum. Madison stared at the loan documents as if hoping the words might rearrange themselves into something less catastrophic. Marcus frantically typed on his laptop, probably searching for strategic frameworks to address imminent financial collapse. "There must be alternatives," Madison finally managed. "Refinancing options, bridge loans, perhaps bringing in equity partners." "With what assets?" Thomas asked. "Your equipment is leased from Carla's LLC. Your patents are licensed from her. Your building is mortgaged to its foundations. Your receivables are worthless without the ability to fulfill orders. What exactly would we be financing?" William Fredericks, who'd been silently reviewing documents throughout the call, finally spoke. "Madison, you need to understand the full picture. The bank's position is actually the least of your concerns. There are also the equipment leases, the supplier agreements, and the investor redemption clauses." Investor redemption. Madison's question came out as barely a whisper. The private equity firms that invested 3 years ago included specific provisions about key person events. If Carla left the company, they could demand immediate buyback of their stakes at a premium. That's another $15 million you'd need to produce within 90 days. The math was brutally simple: $37 million in obligations coming due against a company that could no longer generate revenue. Madison had inherited what looked like a profitable enterprise and transformed it into a financial black hole through one spectacularly ignorant decision. "We could negotiate with Carla," Madison suggested desperately. "Bring her back as a consultant, restore the agreements." "I already explored that option," Thomas interrupted. "I spoke with her yesterday. She very politely explained that she's ethically unable to work with Hartwell Manufacturing due to, and I quote, irreconcilable differences in operational philosophy. She suggested I work with you to find alternative solutions." The banker's tone made clear what he thought of my suggestion. He knew, as I did, that no alternatives existed. Madison had burned the bridge while standing on it, then wondered why she was falling. "What about our parents?" Madison grasped for straws. "Surely they have resources, connections." "Your parents are retired teachers living on pensions," William reminded her gently. "Their only significant asset was their home, which they no longer own. They trusted Carla to protect them, and she has. The house is safe from creditors as long as she maintains the mortgage payments, which she's assured me she will." Another revelation hit Madison. Our parents were now essentially Carla's tenants, living in their family home at my discretion. The daughter they dismissed as lacking strategic vision had strategically protected them from the daughter they'd crowned as CEO. "Oh, this is extortion," Madison declared, her composure finally cracking completely. "She planned this, set us up to fail. We should sue for conspiracy, for breach of fiduciary duty, for..." For what? Thomas's patience had expired. For structuring agreements that protected value she created, for maintaining ownership of her own innovations, for being too competent to be safely fired. Good luck finding a lawyer who will take that case. The call ended, with Thomas providing formal notice of default, 30 days to produce $22 million, or face foreclosure on every asset Hartwell Manufacturing had left. The other creditors would follow within hours, each activating their own acceleration clauses. The company Madison had inherited on Monday would be in bankruptcy by Friday afternoon. Madison sat in the conference room she'd redecorated just months ago, surrounded by strategic plans and innovation frameworks that meant nothing against the reality of financial mathematics. Marcus continued typing, probably updating his resume. The few remaining employees had already begun clearing their desks, understanding that paychecks would soon bounce. The banking crisis had exposed the final truth. Madison had mistaken ownership papers for actual ownership. She held titles to entities that owned nothing, operated nothing, and produced nothing without my cooperation. Every financial instrument had my name on it somewhere, each signature a thread in the web I'd woven to protect what I'd built. The empire had collapsed in 5 days, from Monday's triumphant termination to Friday's financial funeral. Madison had achieved something remarkable in its own way. She'd destroyed in 1 week what had taken 12 years to build. Her MBA professors would probably use it as a case study, though not the kind she'd hoped to inspire. The bank would move to protect its interests. The investors would demand their returns. The suppliers would seize unpaid inventory. By month's end, Hartwell Manufacturing would exist only as a cautionary tale about the difference between inheriting success and understanding how to sustain it. Friday morning's parking lot told the story before Madison even entered the building. At 6:30 a.m., when the first shift should have been arriving, only a handful of cars dotted the vast asphalt expanse. The maintenance van sat abandoned with its keys on the dashboard. The security booth stood empty, its door swinging open in the October wind. Inside, Madison found Hartwell Manufacturing experiencing the corporate equivalent of a ghost town. The production floor, which should have hummed with activity and echoed with machinery, sat silent except for the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Workstations remained set up from Thursday tools laid out for projects that would never resume, safety equipment hanging on hooks like artifacts from a lost civilization. The office section presented an even starker picture. Desk after desk sat cleaned out personal photos, removed coffee mugs taken home. Computers remained, but passwords had been changed and files transferred. The accounting department, usually bustling by 7 a.m., contained only Sarah, who was backing up files onto a personal drive. Sarah. Madison's voice cracked with desperation and authority. "What are you doing? Where is everyone?" Sarah looked up from her computer with the calm expression of someone who'd made peace with their decision. "I'm securing my personal files before I leave. As for everyone else, I'd check your email. Most people sent their resignations overnight." Madison fumbled with her phone, discovering an inbox flooded with resignation letters. Not just a few disgruntled employees, but a mass exodus. The subject lines told the story: immediate resignation, final day notice, moving to better opportunities. She opened them randomly, finding variations of the same theme. "After 12 years of dedicated service, I cannot continue under current leadership. The recent changes have made it impossible to maintain our quality standards. I've accepted a position with Hartwell Precision Solutions, effective immediately." That last company name appeared repeatedly. Madison's hands trembled as she searched for information about Hartwell Precision Solutions. The corporate filing had been submitted Tuesday morning, the day after my termination. The registered owner, Carla Hartwell Innovations, LLC. The business address, a newly leased facility 10 miles away in the same industrial park where I'd first learned manufacturing. "You're all going to work for her." Madison's question came out as an accusation. Sarah closed her laptop with deliberate finality. "Carla called each of us personally, offered double our current salaries, actual equity participation, and a chance to work with someone who values competence over connections. Oh, and she's covering all legal costs if you try to enforce those non-compete agreements you made us sign." The non-compete agreements had been Madison's idea, implemented during her first month as vice president. Standard boilerplate she'd downloaded from a business website, never reviewed by attorneys, probably unenforceable, but intimidating enough to scare hourly workers. I'd hired the best employment lawyer in Indianapolis to ensure my new team felt protected. By 8 a.m., Madison discovered the true extent of the defection. The entire R&D department had resigned en masse. Quality control gone. The senior machinists who understood the equipment's quirks departed. Even the janitorial staff had given notice, unwilling to clean offices for a company without a future. Marcus attempted damage control, calling an all-hands meeting for remaining staff. 17 people showed up in a conference room designed for 200. Madison stood at the podium she'd had installed for her grand presentations, addressing empty chairs and the few employees either too new to have alternatives or too stubborn to accept reality. This is a temporary setback, she announced to the sparse audience. Those who remain will be rewarded when we emerge stronger from this transformation. We're not losing employees, we're identifying who truly believes in our vision. A hand raised in the back. Tom from maintenance, one of the few originals who'd stayed. What vision? We can't manufacture anything. We have no contracts. The bank's calling in loans. What exactly are we supposed to believe in? Madison's prepared speech crumbled. We're pivoting to a consulting model, leveraging our brand reputation to our reputation. Tom laughed bitterly. Our reputation was built on Carla's innovations and reliability. You fired that reputation Monday morning. Now you want us to stick around and pretend Hartwell Manufacturing means something without the person who made it matter. He stood up, pulled off his company badge, and set it on the table. I stayed to see if you'd come to your senses. You haven't. I start at Hartwell Precision Monday morning. His departure triggered others. One by one, the remaining few filed out, leaving Madison addressing completely empty rows. The revelation about R&D proved particularly devastating. Madison discovered that the entire department had been working on private projects for years, collaborating with me during personal time on innovations beyond fasteners. Advanced materials research, revolutionary manufacturing processes, next-generation aerospace applications, all developed under consulting agreements with my LLC. They were double-dipping. Madison raged to William Fredericks, who'd arrived to discuss bankruptcy options. Working on competing products while collecting Hartwell paychecks, William reviewed the employment contracts with practiced patience. Actually, they weren't. Their agreement specifically allowed outside consulting for non-competing products. Since Carla's new developments don't compete with basic fasteners, they're entirely different technological categories. Everything was legal. The depth of planning stunned even William. I hadn't just protected my innovations. I'd cultivated a shadow organization within Hartwell, preparing for the possibility that Madison's ambitions might eventually threaten the company's foundation. Every key employee had been offered consulting opportunities, building loyalty through respect and compensation, rather than corporate manipulation. She poached our entire workforce, Madison insisted. That has to violate some law, some ethical standard. Yes, she offered jobs to people you were planning to fire anyway, William corrected. I've seen Marcus's restructuring plans, 70% workforce reduction replaced by offshore contractors and automation. Carla simply accelerated your timeline while ensuring those employees landed safely. The coup de grace came when Madison discovered the resignation letter from her own assistant, the Stanford graduate she'd hired for prestige rather than competence. Even Madison's hand-picked inner circle recognized a sinking ship. The girl had apologized profusely while explaining that career prospects mattered more than sorority loyalty. By noon, Hartwell Manufacturing employed exactly 5 people. Madison, CEO, Marcus strategic consultant, 2 janitors finishing their final shift, and William Fredericks, who was technically outside counsel billing hourly for bankruptcy advice. The parking lot that had hosted hundreds of cars now contained Madison's, Mercedes Marcus's Tesla, and William's practical sedan. The employees hadn't just left, they'd left with purpose. Each resignation letter thanked Hartwell Manufacturing for past opportunities while expressing excitement about future innovations at Hartwell Precision Solutions. They weren't fleeing a disaster. They were joining a phoenix rising from the ashes of Madison's mismanagement. Social media told the story in real time. LinkedIn blazed with updates about new positions at Hartwell Precision Solutions. Former employees posted photos of their new workspace, modern, clean, equipped with state-of-the-art machinery. The contrast with Hartwell Manufacturing's empty factory floors couldn't have been starker. "How did she arrange all this so quickly?" Madison asked the empty office, her strategic mind finally grasping the scope of my planning. The answer was simple. I hadn't arranged it quickly. The groundwork had been laid for years, relationships built on mutual respect, innovations developed collaboratively, loyalty earned through competence. When Madison lit the fuse with my termination, the explosion followed predictable patterns. She'd mistaken my operational focus for lack of strategy, never realizing that the best strategies look like operations until they activate. Friday afternoon brought the final insult. A delivery truck arrived with boxes of Hartwell Precision Solutions business cards, accidentally sent to the old address. The driver, confused by the empty parking lot, asked Madison to sign for the delivery. She stood holding her replacement's business cards, each one representing an employee who'd chosen competence over corporate politics. The employee revolt wasn't really a revolt. It was a migration from dysfunction to opportunity. Madison had created a leadership vacuum through arrogance and filled it with incompetence. Nature and business both abhor vacuums. The talent flowed to where it was valued, leaving Madison to rule over an empire of empty desks and silent machinery. Saturday's emergency board meeting convened in the conference room Madison had spent $40,000 renovating. The Italian marble table, imported specifically for its executive presence, now hosted a gathering that felt more like a wake than a corporate session. Board members who'd enthusiastically supported Madison's appointment 5 days earlier sat with expressions ranging from disbelief to barely controlled fury. Our parents occupied their usual seats at the far end, looking smaller and older than I'd ever seen them. My father's hands trembled as he arranged papers he wouldn't reference. My mother stared at the table's polished surface as if it might reveal answers to how their golden child had destroyed their legacy in less than a week. The 3 external board members, investors who'd provided crucial capital during our expansion, attended via video conference. Their faces filled the wall-mounted screens like a tribunal preparing judgment. David Steinberg, lead partner at Midwest Venture Capital, spoke first, his usual diplomatic tone replaced by cold precision. "Oh, let's dispense with pleasantries." He began, cutting off Madison's attempted welcome. "In 5 days, you've destroyed $40 million in enterprise value, terminated key personnel responsible for all revenue generation, and triggered default clauses in every major agreement. We need answers." Madison had prepared a presentation, of course. Marcus connected his laptop to the projection system, displaying slides titled Strategic Transformation Initiative. The disconnect between corporate buzzwords and empty factory floors created a surreal atmosphere, like discussing interior decorating while the house burned. "Hartwell Manufacturing is undergoing a strategic pivot." Madison began, her voice attempting confidence it couldn't sustain. "We're transitioning from traditional manufacturing to a knowledge-based consulting model, leveraging our brand equity and industry relationships." "Stop." Patricia Nguyen, representing the employee pension fund that had invested heavily in Hartwell, interrupted with undisguised contempt. "Your brand equity walked out the door when you fired Carla. Your industry relationships terminated their contracts on Wednesday. What exactly are you consulting about? How to destroy a profitable company in record time." The brutality of accurate assessment hung in the air. Madison looked to our parents for support, but my father was studying his hands while my mother had closed her eyes entirely. They'd created this situation through favoritism and were now watching the consequences unfold in real time. "The situation is temporary." Madison insisted, advancing to her next slide showing projected consulting revenues. "Our analysis indicates strong market demand for strategic manufacturing guidance." "Your analysis?" David's laugh carried no humor. "The same analytical skills that led you to fire the person every contract depended on, that identified redundancies in quality control for aerospace components, that replaced experienced engineers with sorority connections. Marcus attempted his usual supporting role. From a strategic perspective, creative destruction often precedes innovation. We're positioning Hartwell for future opportunities rather than remaining trapped by legacy thinking. The third investor, Robert Chen from Industrial Partners LLC, finally spoke. His fund specialized in manufacturing investments and understood the industry's realities. Mr. Chen, no relation. I hope let me explain something about manufacturing. You can't consult about processes you can't perform. You can't advise on innovations you don't own. You can't leverage relationships you've severed. Your creative destruction is just destruction. William Fredericks distributed a financial summary he'd prepared. The numbers told a story more damning than any accusation. Revenue projections, 0. Available cash, exhausted by Friday's payroll. Liabilities, $37 million, and climbing. Assets equipment owned by Carla's LLC, patents licensed from her company, a building mortgaged beyond its value. The bank has initiated foreclosure proceedings, William reported with professional detachment. Equipment lessors are scheduling repossession. Suppliers have placed us on credit hold. Without immediate capital injection or restored operations, bankruptcy is inevitable within 10 days. Then we inject capital. Madison declared desperation, cracking her executive facade. The board has resources. Our investors have deep pockets. This is the moment to demonstrate commitment to transformation. Inject capital into what? Patricia's question cut deep. And empty building machines that won't operate. A workforce that's already employed elsewhere. You want us to throw good money after your catastrophic judgment. David pulled up his own presentation, apparently prepared for this moment. We've spent the last 48 hours evaluating options. Our conclusion is unanimous: pursue immediate acquisition by Hartwell Precision Solutions. The room fell silent. Madison's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and rage as the implications registered. The investors wanted to sell her inherited empire to the sister she'd fired. That's corporate raid, Madison stammered. Carla orchestrated this entire crisis to steal the company at a discount. It's illegal, unethical. It's business, Robert interrupted. Your sister built value through innovation and relationships. You destroyed it through arrogance and incompetence. She's now offering to purchase the remains at fair market value, which given current circumstances is approximately 10% of what it was worth on Monday. William distributed the preliminary offer documents. I'd structured it carefully through intermediaries, maintaining technical distance while ensuring fairness. The offer included assuming most liabilities, protecting pension obligations, and providing a transition fund for remaining stakeholders. More generous than bankruptcy would allow, less than Madison believed she deserved. 10%. Madison's voice cracked completely. She steals everything and offers us 10 cents on the dollar. She didn't steal anything, Patricia corrected firmly. She built a business using her own innovations, protected it through legal structures, and maintained it through personal relationships. You inherited the shell and destroyed it trying to crack open value you didn't understand existed separately from corporate ownership. Our father finally spoke, his voice aged by the week's revelations. We did this. His words carried the weight of parental failure. We promised Madison something that wasn't ours to give, told her she deserved leadership because of her degree, not her capability, created this. He gestured helplessly at the empty chairs representing fled employees, this disaster through our favoritism. My mother's tears flowed silently. The daughter they'd overlooked for 12 years had built everything. The daughter they'd crowned had destroyed it in 5 days. The lesson in parental blindness couldn't have been clearer or more costly. I won't sell to her, Madison declared, grasping for her last shred of authority. As CEO, I refuse the offer. We'll find alternative solutions. "You're no longer CEO," David announced, sliding a resolution across the marble table. "The board met telephonically this morning. Given the emergency circumstances and your catastrophic performance, we voted to remove you effective immediately. Robert will serve as interim CEO to oversee the sale process." The coup was complete, but it was Madison's own incompetence rather than corporate maneuvering that had executed it. She'd provided overwhelming evidence of unfitness for leadership, documented by her own strategic consultant's recordings. The board had simply acknowledged reality. Marcus began packing his laptop, apparently recognizing his consulting contract had terminated with his sponsor's authority. He avoided Madison's eyes, probably calculating how to distance himself from this career-destroying catastrophe. Strategic consultants could always find new executives to mislead, but association with this level of failure would require creative resume revision. "You planned this together," Madison accused the room at large, "conspired with Carla to humiliate me, to steal my birthright." "Your birthright." Patricia's voice carried decades of business experience and zero patience for delusion. "Your birthright was a functioning company built by your sister's innovation. You received it Monday and destroyed it by Friday. The only conspiracy here was your parents conspiring to give you something you couldn't handle." The meeting dissolved into logistics. William would coordinate bankruptcy filing if the sale didn't proceed. Robert would negotiate with my intermediaries. The investors would attempt to salvage something from their destroyed value. Our parents would face the reality of retirement without the income they'd expected from their legacy. Madison sat alone at her renovated conference table as others filed out, surrounded by the trappings of executive authority that no longer meant anything. The Italian marble reflected her isolation, a CEO without a company, a strategist who'd engineered her own defeat, a golden child who'd turned inheritance to ash through pure incompetence. The board meeting had delivered justice through democracy, removing a leader who'd proven leadership meant more than titles and degrees. Madison had wanted corporate power. She'd received a corporate education in how quickly that power evaporates when competence leaves the building. Sunday evening arrived with the kind of desperation that drives people to actions they'd never consider in calmer moments. Madison appeared at my apartment door at 9 p.m., her carefully maintained appearance showing 5 days of accelerating deterioration. Her designer suit was wrinkled, her professional makeup replaced by smeared mascara, her styled hair hanging limp with stress. Behind her, Marcus waited in his Tesla, apparently serving as both driver and witness to whatever scene would unfold. I'd expected this visit since the board meeting had prepared for it both emotionally and legally. The security system recorded everything my phone was set to capture audio, and Jonathan waited on standby in case legal intervention became necessary. When someone has destroyed everything through arrogance and faces consequences, desperation can drive dangerous decisions. "We need to talk," Madison announced, pushing past me into the apartment she'd visited exactly twice in 12 years. She surveyed my living space with the calculating eyes of someone seeking leverage, noting the comfortable but modest furniture, the engineering awards on walls, the evidence of a life focused on creation rather than consumption. I poured 2 glasses of water, maintaining the civility our parents had taught before their favoritism poisoned family dynamics. Madison refused hers, preferring to pace my living room like a caged predator seeking escape routes. Her emotional state cycled visibly between rage, despair, and manic determination. "You destroyed me," she began, her voice cracking between accusation and plea, "systematically, deliberately, with malice. You planned this for years, waiting for your chance to humiliate me, to steal everything our parents built." "Our parents built a failing fastener company," I interrupted calmly. "I built the aerospace manufacturer you inherited and destroyed. Every innovation, every contract, every relationship that created value came from my work, not family legacy." Madison's hands clenched and unclenched repeatedly, a physical manifestation of her internal struggle between violence and negotiation. You sabotaged everything, locked the systems, stole the employees, turned our clients against us. I protected my intellectual property after you terminated our agreements, offered jobs to people you were planning to fire, maintained relationships I'd built over 12 years. Each correction was delivered without emotion, simple facts against her narrative of victimization. The pacing intensified. Madison's designer heels clicked against my hardwood floors in irregular rhythms, matching her fragmented thought process. It doesn't matter how you justify it. What matters is fixing this. You need to come back, restore the system's honor family loyalty. Family loyalty. The phrase finally sparked emotion in my voice. Where was family loyalty when you documented my every mistake to build a case for my removal? When you hired consultants specifically to undermine my position? When you celebrated taking the role I'd earned through 12 years of sacrifice? Madison stopped pacing, turning to face me with an expression that mixed entitlement with desperation. I'm your sister. That has to mean something. You can't just watch me fail, watch our parents lose everything. Our parents are protected, I assured her. Their house remains safe in my name. I've established a trust ensuring their retirement income. They'll be more secure than if Hartwell Manufacturing had continued under your leadership. This revelation triggered Madison's first transition from pleading to rage. So you planned everything, manipulated them into transferring their house, positioned yourself as their savior while setting me up for failure. I protected them from business creditors 4 years ago, long before you returned from Stanford. The setup for your failure required only one thing, giving you exactly what you demanded. You failed entirely through your own choices. The rage phase accelerated. Madison grabbed a glass paperweight from my bookshelf, an award from Boeing for innovation excellence, and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, leaving a dent I'd later frame as a reminder of this moment. Marcus must have heard the crash from outside, but wisely chose not to intervene. I'll sue you. Madison snarled, her executive composure completely abandoned. Corporate espionage, theft of trade secrets, intentional interference with business operations. I'll spend every penny fighting you in court. With what funds, I asked quietly, and on what grounds every action I took was legally protected by contracts you signed without reading? Every innovation belonged to me before you terminated our agreements. Every employee chose their future freely. Madison's threats multiplied and escalated. She'd expose me to media as a vindictive sister who destroyed family business. She'd report me to aerospace regulators for unethical practices. She'd ensure I never worked in the industry again. Each threat revealed greater desperation and less connection to reality. And I'm recording this conversation, I informed her calmly. Your threats of defamation, false regulatory reports, and career destruction are all actionable. Would you like to continue accumulating legal liability, or would you prefer to discuss realistic solutions? The revelation of recording equipment triggered Madison's final transformation. The rage collapsed into calculated manipulation, the business school training reasserting itself. She sank onto my couch, suddenly smaller tears appearing with suspicious timing. I'm sorry, she whispered, the words sounding foreign in her mouth. I was wrong, arrogant, stupid. I see that now. The performance might have been convincing if I hadn't watched her practice emotional manipulation for 28 years. Please, Carla, give me another chance. I'll follow your lead, learn from you, be the sister you deserve. I offered to teach you the business 8 years ago, I reminded her. You said manufacturing was beneath someone with your education. I invited you to shadow me 5 years ago. You were too busy building your network. I suggested partnering 3 years ago. You told our parents I was trying to limit your potential. Each historical fact landed like a physical blow. Madison's manufactured tears became genuine as consequences crashed through manipulation. I was young, stupid, influenced by Marcus and his theories. You're 28 years old with an advanced degree. I cut off the excuse. You made calculated decisions to undermine someone who was saving your inheritance. Age didn't make you cruel. Education didn't make you incompetent. Those were choices. Madison made one final attempt, pulling out a folder she'd concealed in her jacket. The board authorized me to make this offer, return as president with full operational control. I'll remain as CEO but defer to your decisions. 60-40 equity split in your favor. Complete authority over all technical decisions. I reviewed the documents, noting the desperation in their terms. The board was offering me everything except what mattered: trust. They wanted my competence to save their investment while keeping the structure that had enabled Madison's destruction. No. The single word carried 12 years of building something to watch it given away. Hartwell Manufacturing chose appearance over substance, connections over competence, favoritism over fairness. That culture dies with your leadership. Then make a counter-offer, Madison pleaded. Tell me what would bring you back. Any terms, any conditions? 10% of current assessed value for complete ownership. I stated the terms Robert Chen would present Monday morning. Assumption of pension liabilities and secured creditor obligations. Transition funding for displaced stakeholders. Non-competition agreements from all former board members. Madison's face revealed the math she'd been avoiding. 10% of assessed value meant approximately $4 million for a company worth $50 million on Monday. The assumption of liabilities meant that $4 million would go entirely to creditors. She'd inherit nothing from destroying everything. That's not a negotiation, she whispered. That's revenge. That's market value for a company with no revenue, no workforce, no accessible assets, and no operational capability, I corrected. It's more than bankruptcy would yield and less than competent leadership would have preserved. Madison stood to leave, her final manipulation spent. At the door, she turned for one last threat. You'll regret this. Family is forever. Someday you'll need something from me, and I'll remember how you treated me when I was desperate. I'll remember how you treated me when you had power, I replied. That's the difference between us. You see relationships as leverage. I see them as responsibilities. She left without another word, her heels clicking down the hallway with the irregular rhythm of intoxication drunk on failure rather than alcohol. Marcus's Tesla pulled away quietly, carrying Madison toward whatever future she'd build from the ashes of her brief executive career. I spent the rest of Sunday evening repairing the wall where Boeing's award had shattered. The dent remained visible beneath fresh paint, a reminder that some damage can be covered but never entirely erased. Madison had inherited an empire and reduced it to rubble in 5 days. I'd spend the next phase building something better from those ruins, surrounded by people who valued competence over connections. The desperate plea had revealed Madison's final truth: she'd never wanted to lead Hartwell Manufacturing, only to rule it. Leadership required understanding what created value. Rule required only the authority to destroy it. She'd proven definitively which role she'd prepared for, and market forces had delivered appropriate compensation. Monday morning brought the meeting I dreaded more than any contract negotiation or technical challenge in 12 years. Our parents arrived at my apartment at 8 a.m., looking like they'd aged a decade in a week. My father, who'd always walked with the authority of a business owner, now moved with the careful steps of someone unsure of their footing. My mother clutched her purse like a lifeline, her knuckles white against worn leather. I'd prepared coffee and the cinnamon rolls my mother had taught me to bake during the better years, before success divided our family along lines of perceived potential. They sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd worked out the calculations that saved their company while Madison was choosing sorority letters at Stanford. "We know what you're going to buy, Hartwell," my father began, without preamble, his voice carrying resignation rather than his usual certainty. Robert Chen called us after the board meeting, explained the terms, the assumptions of liability, He paused, searching for words to describe their empire's dissolution, the fairness of the offer given current circumstances. My mother hadn't touched her coffee or cinnamon roll. She stared at the table's surface as if it might provide answers to questions she couldn't articulate. When she finally spoke, her voice emerged barely above a whisper. "How did we get here, Carla? How did we fail so completely?" The question hung between us, weighted with 12 years of choices and consequences. I could have listed their failures, the favoritism, the broken promises, the willingness to hand their company to someone who'd never earned it. Instead, I waited, having learned that truth sometimes needs silence to emerge. "We were so proud when Madison got into Stanford," my father continued, filling the vacuum. "Our daughter at an elite university studying business like the successful people we read about. You were already saving the company, but that felt like survival. Madison represented advancement evolution, becoming the kind of family that produced executives instead of workers." The admission revealed more than he probably intended. They'd seen my work as necessary but temporary, a bridge to Madison's theoretical sophistication. They'd mistaken education for capability, credentials for competence, social class for business acumen. "You never complained," my mother added, finally meeting my eyes. "Never pointed out the unfairness when we promised Madison the leadership you'd earned. Never argued when we praised her potential while taking your achievements for granted. We thought that meant you agreed with our assessment." I was too busy keeping the company alive to argue about future titles. I replied, maintaining the calm tone that had carried me through 12 years of being overlooked. Every day brought new challenges, supplier negotiations, quality crises, customer requirements. Fighting for recognition seemed less important than fighting for survival. My father pulled out a folder he'd been carrying, spreading its contents across my kitchen table. Employment agreements, board minutes, financial statements, the paper trail of their favoritism documented in corporate records. His hands shook slightly as he arranged them, evidence of decisions that had seemed reasonable until consequences arrived. "We gave Madison equal salary to yours after 6 months of contributing nothing," he read from one document. "Approved her hiring decisions without questioning qualifications. Signed every consultant contract she requested." Each admission came with visible pain, a parent confronting their enabling of destruction. "We thought we were being progressive," my mother interjected, desperation coloring her words. "Supporting our daughter in a male-dominated industry, ensuring she had every advantage. The business magazines talked about glass ceilings and old boys networks. We wanted to be different, to show that family companies could embrace modern leadership." "You confused nepotism with progressivism," I said gently. "Giving unearned authority to anyone, male or female, isn't progressive. It's destructive. Real progress would have meant promoting based on merit regardless of genetics." The truth landed hard. They'd wrapped favoritism in the language of equality, used contemporary buzzwords to justify ancient mistakes. Madison's gender had provided cover for their deeper bias, the belief that education trumped experience, that potential mattered more than proven performance. "She was so confident," my father said, his voice now carrying bewilderment. "Spoke about strategic visions and paradigm shifts with such authority. When you talked about production schedules and quality metrics, it sounded so mundane in comparison. We mistook her confidence for competence." "Confidence is easy when you've never faced real consequences," I observed. I couldn't afford confidence. Every decision carried weight. Missed deadlines meant lost contracts. Quality failures meant crashed aircraft. Wrong choices meant bankruptcy. Madison's decisions carried no weight until last week, when they suddenly carried everything. My mother reached across the table, attempting to take my hand. I allowed the contact, but didn't return the grip. "Can you forgive us? We see now how blind we were, how unfair. We'll make it right. Tell Madison she needs to accept responsibility, support whatever decisions you make." This isn't about forgiveness or support, I interrupted carefully. It's about understanding why it happened so it doesn't repeat. You didn't just favor Madison, you created her. Taught her that birthright mattered more than merit, that charm could substitute for competence, that she deserved authority without earning it. My father's expression crumbled as full understanding arrived. We destroyed both our daughters, gave one too much, the other too little, made Madison believe she was superior and you believe you weren't valued. Both lies, both our fault. The role reversal struck me, parents confessing to their child, seeking absolution for parental sins. But I wasn't their priest, and business failure didn't wash away personal betrayal. They'd have to find their own path to redemption. What happens to us now? My mother asked the practical question behind emotional admission. The house, our retirement, our future, everything depended on Hartwell Manufacturing's continued success. The house remains protected in my name, I assured them. I've established a trust that will provide monthly income matching what you would have received from the company. Your retirement is secure, your lifestyle maintained. You'll be better off than if Madison had continued destroying value. The revelation triggered tears from my mother, relief mixed with shame at needing their overlooked daughter's protection. My father stared at the financial documents, recognizing the structure I'd created to shield them from their own favoritism's consequences. You planned for our failure, he said quietly, saw this coming years ago and built protections we didn't know we needed. I planned for multiple scenarios, I corrected. Madison, succeeding was one possibility. Madison failing was another. Your security shouldn't depend on which occurred, so I ensured it didn't. They spent another hour attempting various forms of reconciliation, promises to advocate for me with Madison, offers to publicly acknowledge their mistakes, suggestions of family therapy to heal divisions. Each proposal missed the fundamental point: the family business was ending because the family had failed the business. We'll support the sale, my father finally said, accepting the inevitable. Tell the board you have our blessing, not that it matters anymore. And Carla, he paused at my door, looking older than his 70 years. The company you're building, Hartwell Precision Solutions, don't put family in the name. Build something clean based on merit. Learn from our mistakes. After they left, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by the documents they'd abandoned. 12 years of building something while being told I was merely maintaining it. 5 days of watching someone destroy it while being told she was transforming it. The difference between creation and destruction had never been clearer. My parents' revelation changed nothing about the business transaction, but shifted something in my personal understanding. They hadn't just failed as business owners, they'd failed as parents, creating one child who couldn't handle power, and another who'd had to protect herself from family. Their confession didn't heal those wounds, but at least acknowledged they existed. Monday morning, exactly 1 week after Madison's triumphant termination of my employment, I returned to Hartwell Manufacturing. This time, I entered through the front door with a team of lawyers, accountants, and transition specialists. The security guard, a new hire who didn't recognize me, checked our credentials carefully before allowing entry. The irony of needing permission to enter the building I'd saved wasn't lost on anyone present. The parking lot that had overflowed with vehicles just 7 days ago now held only a handful of cars. Robert Chen waited in the lobby with the interim leadership team he'd assembled over the weekend, competent professionals who specialized in distressed acquisitions. They greeted me with the respect Madison had never shown, understanding that rebuilding required recognizing who'd built originally. We convened in the main conference room, the one Madison hadn't renovated because it lacked the prestige of her executive suite. The functional space with its practical furniture and clear sight lines to the production floor suited the serious business of transferring ownership. Jonathan Reeves distributed the purchase agreements while accountants presented final valuations. The assessed value, accounting for all liabilities, is $42 million. Robert began, his tone professional but tinged with regret at the destruction of value. Your offer of 10% amounts to 4.2 million. Given the assumption of 37 million in liabilities, the net payment to equity holders is effectively zero. Madison sat at the far end of the table, Marcus conspicuously absent. She dressed in her finest suit, applied makeup to hide a week of stress, and attempted to project dignity in defeat. The effort failed. Nothing could disguise the hollow expression of someone who'd inherited an empire and destroyed it in record time. The purchase agreement includes several key provisions. Jonathan explained, walking through documents that represented months of careful structuring. Hartwell Precision Solutions acquires all assets, assumes secured liabilities, honors pension obligations, and provides transition funding for displaced stakeholders. In return, all former board members sign non-competition agreements and confidentiality provisions. Madison's lawyer, a young associate from a mid-tier firm, the best she could afford, attempted weak objections to various terms. Each was dismissed with references to bankruptcy alternatives that would yield far worse outcomes. When negotiating from a position of absolute weakness, principles matter less than mitigation. The signing ceremony proceeded with mechanical precision. Board members executed documents with the resigned efficiency of people accepting inevitable consequences. My parents signed with hands that shook slightly, transferring ownership of their life's work to the daughter they'd overlooked. Madison's signature came last, each letter formed with deliberate slowness, as if delay might somehow alter reality. "Congratulations," Robert said with genuine warmth once the final signature was notarized. Hartwell Precision Solutions now owns all assets and operations of Hartwell Manufacturing. The employees will be relieved to know competent leadership has returned. The word employees triggered the day's first surprise. As if summoned by the completion of documents, cars began filling the parking lot. The workers who'd abandoned Madison's sinking ship returned like a tide, ready to resume their roles under leadership that valued their contributions. Sarah from accounting arrived first, carrying boxes of personal items she'd removed just days before. "Welcome back, boss," she said simply, the title carrying more weight than any Madison had claimed. Others followed: machinists, engineers, quality inspectors, maintenance crews, each greeting me with variations of relief and anticipation. They'd spent a week in limbo, technically employed by Hartwell Precision Solutions, but unable to work until the acquisition completed. By noon, the production floor hummed with familiar activity. The German equipment, recognizing authorized access codes, awakened from its forced dormancy. Machinery that had refused Madison's commands responded instantly to passwords. I provided digital systems acknowledging their rightful administrator. The contrast with the previous week's silence couldn't have been more profound. Madison watched the resurrection from the executive office she'd occupied for exactly 1 week. Her personal items, the Barcelona tiles, never installed the furniture arrangements, never implemented the strategic plans, never executed, sat in boxes by the door. The space would return to functional use, its brief period as a monument to ambition forgotten. "There is one matter requiring immediate attention," Patricia Nguyen announced, representing the Employee Pension Fund. "The embezzlement investigation initiated by Friday's discoveries needs resolution." The room fell silent. Madison's face, already pale from a week of consequences, went white. "Embezzlement? That's ridiculous. I never—" Marcus's entrance interrupted her denial, but he wasn't arriving as her strategic consultant. He was accompanied by federal investigators and carrying boxes of evidence. The boyfriend who'd enabled her destruction had apparently decided cooperation served his interests better than loyalty. "Ms. Hartwell," the lead investigator addressed Madison formally, "we've received substantial documentation regarding misappropriation of company funds. Mr. Chen has provided evidence of offshore accounts, fraudulent consulting contracts, and systematic diversion of corporate assets. We'll need you to come with us for questioning." The final revelation explained Marcus's constant presence and documentation. He hadn't been building a case for Madison's leadership, he'd been building a case for his own immunity. Every strategic consultant invoice, every transferred fund, every questionable transaction had been carefully recorded by the man she'd trusted completely. "You recorded everything," Madison said to Marcus, her voice small and defeated. "Every conversation, every decision, every crime." Marcus completed his accent, returning slightly under stress. "You thought you were so clever setting aside strategic funds for our future. I thought it better to set aside evidence for mine." The investigators allowed Madison to gather her purse, the designer bag that cost more than most employees' monthly salaries, before escorting her from the building. She walked through the lobby where she'd fired me so publicly past employees who averted their eyes from her humiliation into a future that would involve courtrooms rather than boardrooms. The irony was complete. Madison had accused me of sabotage while actively embezzling. She'd proclaimed strategic vision while stealing from the company she'd inherited. She demanded family loyalty while betraying every principle of fiduciary duty. The golden child had been tarnished all along. Her shine merely reflected light from achievements she'd never earned. With Madison's departure, the transformation accelerated. I addressed the assembled workforce from the production floor, standing among machinery rather than above it. The speech was brief. Workers who'd weathered crisis needed reassurance, not rhetoric. "Hartwell Precision Solutions isn't a new company," I explained. "It's the company we've always been, just with a structure that matches our values. Competence over connections, innovation over imitation, respect over rhetoric. Every person here has proven their commitment through crisis. That loyalty will be rewarded with equity, participation, profit sharing, and a voice in our future." The announcement of employee ownership triggered applause that felt more like relief than celebration. These people had watched their work devalued, their expertise, dismissed their futures, threatened by someone who'd inherited authority without understanding. Now they'd own part of what they built, sharing in success they created. The rest of Monday proceeded with systematic restoration. Quality controls Madison had dismissed as redundant were reinstated. Engineers she'd fired for resistance to change returned to projects she'd never understood. Suppliers who'd suspended shipments resumed delivery schedules. Clients who'd terminated contracts began discussing renewals. Boeing called first David Richardson's relief, evident in every word. "Carla, thank God, we've got 40,000 units waiting for your specifications and a production schedule that's 7 days behind. How quickly can we resume?" "We're already loading the parameters," I assured him. "First shipment goes out Wednesday. We'll run extra shifts to make up lost time, no charge for the acceleration. Hartwell Manufacturing may have failed its obligations, but Hartwell Precision Solutions honors its commitments." By evening, the building Madison had emptied was full again. The second shift arrived to find operational normalcy, machines running, supervisors directing, quality standards maintained. They'd lost a week of wages to executive incompetence, but gained partial ownership of their workplace. Most considered it a worthwhile trade. I stood in what had been my office then. Madison's now simply a functional space for whoever needed it. The view overlooked the production floor where real value was created, not the parking lot where executive egos measured themselves by vehicle choice. The company I'd saved from bankruptcy, watched gifted to incompetence, and bought from ruins was finally structured to match its values. The golden girl was gone, her brief reign serving only to demonstrate the difference between inheriting success and creating it. The overlooked daughter had returned not for revenge, but for restoration. The employees who'd chosen competence over connections now owned part of their choice. And the precision solutions in our name would apply to more than engineering. They'd apply to every aspect of building something indestructible through merit rather than birthright. 6 months after that transformative Monday, Hartwell Precision Solutions hosted its first annual employee owner meeting. The production floor, cleared of machinery for the occasion, held round tables where workers sat as equal stakeholders rather than subordinate employees. The contrast with Madison's hierarchical seating arrangements couldn't have been more pronounced here. Machinists mingled with engineers, accountants, collaborated with quality inspectors, and everyone held the same voting rights in their shared enterprise. I stood before the assembled group holding the latest contract award from the Department of Defense. The number still seemed surreal: $347 million over 5 years for next-generation aerospace components. The innovations I developed during those midnight hours, refined through collaboration with this talented team, had captured the attention of the most demanding customer in the world. This contract isn't just about money, I explained to the hushed audience. It's validation that competence matters more than connections, that innovation trumps imitation, that a company owned by its workers can outcompete traditional corporate structures. Every person in this room owns a piece of this success because every person contributed to earning it. The profit-sharing calculations appeared on screens around the room. Production workers who'd earned $40,000 annually would receive bonuses exceeding their base salaries. Engineers who'd been terminated for resistance to change now held equity worth more than Madison's MBA had cost. Sarah from accounting, who'd backed up files while others fled, would retire 5 years early thanks to her ownership stake. But we're not just celebrating financial success. I continued, advancing to slides showing our community impact. We've established apprenticeship programs with local technical schools, funded scholarships for employees' children, created a hardship fund for families facing medical crises. This is what happens when a company serves its workers instead of exploiting them. The audience erupted in sustained applause, not for me, but for themselves, for having the courage to choose uncertainty over servitude, competence over credentials, shared success over individual ambition. They'd risked everything on the belief that business could operate on principles rather than politics. The vindication felt sweeter than any revenge could have. During the break, Roberto Vega approached with photographs from his daughter's graduation. She'd earned her engineering degree debt-free thanks to our education assistance program implemented within weeks of the acquisition. "She wants to work here," he said with pride that transcended parental bias. "Not because I do, but because she sees a future where talent matters." The future had arrived faster than anyone expected. Our innovations and adaptive materials had revolutionized not just fasteners, but entire approaches to aerospace design. NASA incorporated our components into Mars mission preparations. Boeing redesigned aircraft sections around our capabilities. The company Madison had nearly destroyed for being too operational, now defined operational excellence for an entire industry. The meeting's final agenda item required delicate handling. William Fredericks presented the resolution establishing a fund for displaced Hartwell manufacturing stakeholders. Despite everything fairness demanded, acknowledging that some had suffered through no fault beyond trusting the wrong leadership, the fund would help those who'd lost investments or pensions during Madison's brief reign. "This isn't legally required," William explained. "Hartwell Precision Solutions bears no obligation to Hartwell manufacturing stakeholders beyond what we assumed in the purchase. This is about choosing to be better than what we replaced." The vote was unanimous. Employee owners who'd suffered under Madison's leadership chose to extend compassion to those who'd enabled it. My parents would receive their full expected retirement income. Small investors who'd trusted family reputation over due diligence would recover their principal. Even board members who'd approved Madison's appointment would receive modest settlements. Madison herself remained notably absent from any assistance considerations. Her embezzlement trial had concluded 2 months prior with a plea agreement, 3 years federal minimum security restitution of stolen funds, and lifetime prohibition from fiduciary positions. The golden girl who'd believed herself above operational details now operated a prison laundry, learning the dignity of honest work through court mandate. Marcus Chen had avoided prosecution through cooperation, but found his consulting career effectively ended. His testimony revealed such breathtaking incompetence that no executive would risk association. Last anyone heard, he was teaching business English in Shanghai, his MBA credentials worthless in a world that had witnessed their practical application. My parents attended the meeting as guests, sitting quietly in the back row. The transformation in their demeanor spoke volumes. Gone was the prideful certainty that had crowned Madison as heir apparent. In its place sat humble appreciation for their overlooked daughter's compassion. They'd learned that success meant more than surnames, that legacy required more than inheritance. During my closing remarks, I addressed the principle that guided every decision. We don't build to prove others wrong. We build to prove ourselves right. Right about valuing competence over credentials. Right about sharing success rather than hoarding it. Right about creating something indestructible through integrity and earned expertise. The meeting concluded with an announcement that would have seemed impossible during Madison's tenure. Every employee would receive 40 hours of annual paid time for skills development, conferences, courses, certifications, whatever advanced their expertise. The company that nearly died from strategic ignorance would invest systematically in tactical brilliance. As attendees departed energized by shared ownership and collective purpose, I remained in the empty space remembering another gathering, the one where Madison had announced her transformative vision to employees she'd never bothered understanding. The one where strategic buzzwords had substituted for substantive knowledge. The one that began Hartwell Manufacturing's 5-day journey from prosperity to ruins. The justice wasn't in Madison's imprisonment or Marcus's exile or even the board's humiliation. It was in proving that businesses built on competence could outperform those built on connections, that workers given ownership would outproduce those given orders, that operational excellence wasn't something to transcend, but to treasure. Tom from maintenance, one of the few originals who'd weathered both regimes, paused at the door. "You know what the best part is?" he asked with the wisdom of someone who'd fixed broken things for 30 years. "We're not trying to be something we're not. No fancy titles or strategic visions. Just good people doing good work and sharing the rewards. That's the revenge, isn't it? Being exactly what she thought was beneath her." He was right. The sweetest justice wasn't in Madison's fall, but in our rise. She'd inherited a traditional manufacturing company and tried to transform it into a strategic consulting fantasy. We'd built an advanced technology enterprise by accepting that making things well mattered more than making things sound important. 6 months after being fired for lacking strategic vision, I ran one of the most innovative aerospace manufacturers in America. 6 months after firing me for being too operational, Madison operated prison equipment she couldn't override with corporate buzzwords. The girl who'd smiled while walking away had built something that would last. The girl who'd smirked while wielding power had discovered that power without competence was just expensive destruction. But the real satisfaction came from the parking lot after the meeting. Once divided between executive privilege and worker utility, it now held vehicles reflecting shared prosperity. The maintenance supervisor's new truck, the accountant's hybrid sedan, the engineer's practical SUV. Each represented someone who'd chosen competence over politics and been rewarded with more than Madison's favoritism could ever have provided. Hartwell Precision Solutions succeeded because precision meant more than manufacturing tolerances. It meant precisely valuing contribution over connection, precisely rewarding merit over manipulation, precisely understanding that the best revenge against those who'd undervalued your operational excellence was operating with such excellence that your value became undeniable. The golden girl had tarnished, the overlooked daughter had shined, and the empire built on competence had proved more indestructible than any inheritance based on birthright. That was the justice, not sweet because it hurt those who'd hurt me, but sweet because it helped those who'd helped themselves by choosing substance over style. The smile I'd worn walking away from Madison's triumph had been prescient, not bitter. I'd known something she'd never understood. True power came from building things others needed, not inheriting things others built. She'd taken a title. I'd taken everything that made the title worth having. And 6 months later, surrounded by employee owners who'd bet on competence and won, the justice felt complete. If you were in my position, would you have structured things differently to protect what you'd built? Have you ever experienced a situation where someone's credentials mattered more than your contributions? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about triumph over adversity, competence over connections, and the sweet justice of earned success. Share this with anyone who's ever felt overlooked or undervalued. Sometimes the best revenge truly is massive success built on genuine merit. Thank you for listening, and remember, build something so valuable that no one can take it away, no matter what title they inherit.